Okay. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for all the questions that did come in when I did ask about nutrition questions that are of interest. Obviously, a lot of responses came through, so I thought what we'd do is break this down to a 3-part series and just talk about some of the common mistakes and things that you can take away immediately. And then part 2 and part 3 will be based more around carbohydrates and hydration, and then really working towards your race day. So I think it's important just to acknowledge Bill's actually a fantastic app called Race Day, which is a free app which helps you plan out your race day fueling and hydration. It's a very good app that I think hopefully a lot of the pathetic triathletes use. It's very good. And then obviously introducing my own company, which is called Fuelin, which is the world's first training-based nutrition app. So I'll just introduce myself briefly. Elizabeth isn't going to be on the call today, but my name's Scott Tyndall. I'm Australian. I've worked in professional sport for the past over 20 years, from professional rugby, professional sailing with America's Cup, Oracle Team USA, NHL with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and since 2017 with Ironman, working with professional athletes, from some athletes you may know like Sarah Piano, Holly Lawrence, Kevin Collington, and amongst a few others. And then a lot of age group athletes is actually where I like to work with. We set up, my background was physiotherapy originally, then a master's in sports medicine, and then postgraduate study in performance nutrition as well. Fuelin is an iOS app which was released onto the iOS store just over a year ago, and it's servicing around 500 users currently, monthly users. Okay, so today what I thought we'd talk about is the top triathlon nutrition mistakes. Carbohydrates, I think they're always an interesting one to cover, and then hydration, how to measure your needs. And then if we do have some time, we'll go through some open Q&A. So from the top 6 triathlete mistakes that we see, I think firstly is not establishing baselines, number 1. So what does that mean? It means that you don't really know where you're going unless you know where you're beginning. So simple things that can be done, especially for triathletes, I think is something like getting a blood test. Now that blood test, you don't necessarily have to get everything done, but certainly if you are an endurance athlete, I would be requesting a full iron panel, in particular, getting your ferritin measured, getting your transferrin saturation measured, and your hemoglobin. This will allow you to determine whether you are iron deficient non-anemic, or iron deficient anemic. That's probably one of the key blood tests that you should be getting as a female or a male endurance athlete who is doing a fair bit of training. Vitamin D status would also be something that I would get a lot of you to do. And then you can look at other health markers, namely around sort of things like your HbA1c, which is a measure of blood glucose over the last 90 days, if that's something of concern to you. You can obviously get what's called a full blood count and full biochemistry. That will tell you things like your hematocrit, your red blood cell count, sodium levels and things like that. But certainly a baseline in a blood test at least once a year would be recommended. I think the other baseline a lot of people will shy away from is something like a lot of athletes will talk about losing weight or trying to improve body composition without really understanding what their body composition is. So something like a DEXA scan, so that's a DXA scan, can give you a very thorough indication of what your subcutaneous fat is, but also your visceral fat. That's the fat in and around your organs, which is more of a health concern. It will also establish bone mineral density. Bone mineral density typically isn't assessed till you're around 70 years of age. If you are osteopenic or osteoporotic, that is, have low bone mineral density, then it's probably too late by the age of 70. I can tell you now that I have seen many athletes at the ages between 35 and 45 who have low bone mineral density, either in their hips or in their spine. And if it's actioned on early, i.e. by improving vitamin D status, improving protein intake and improving weight bearing activity, i.e. resistance training, then that can certainly make a big difference, not just to your performance, but certainly to your health. Other baselines, which we'll talk about, is things like what is your sweat rate and what is your fluid intake to manage your hydration correctly. And then certainly leading into point 2, how much carbohydrates do you actually know how much you can take in per hour? And are you practicing that in training in order to improve that, so that things like race day app, you can actually structure what products you would be using on race day to have your best race. And that leads into number 2. So what we often see with triathletes is that they're not practicing carbohydrate intake. There could be a number of reasons behind that, i.e. most likely that they're afraid of consuming carbohydrates because they think it will make them fat. Consuming carbohydrates in session is not going to make you fat. What you do outside of all your training is probably going to have much more of an impact on that. It is also going to have much more of an impact in terms of your daily nutrition on things like fat burning ability or fat oxidation, okay? If you practice your carbohydrates in appropriate intensity sessions, i.e. Z3 or above, or at race pace sessions, you will be improving your ability to utilize carbohydrates in those sessions and ultimately in race day. Back to point 1, which relates to point 3, is lack of sweat rate data. So if you don't understand how much you sweat on the bike or on the run at a given temperature, if we just break that into less than 85 or more than 85 Fahrenheit, then you cannot effectively understand how much fluid you need to consume on the bike or on the run in order to maintain some sort of level of body weight balance or hydration status. So simple things like weighing yourself before a session and after a session and working out the percentage of body weight lost is a simple way of determining what your sweat rate is. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. In terms of number 4, the fourth nutrition mistake we see with triathletes is there's a single macro focus. Probably in the last few years, there was a move towards things like high fat, low carb, and excluding a macronutrient in the form of carbohydrates. More recently, a lot of athletes are focusing on high carbohydrate fueling and potentially excluding things like protein and fat. There is not one single macronutrient that's going to make you a super triathlete. It's a combination of all of them and getting them in the right balance, i.e. high protein, probably moderate amounts of fat, and fairly high carbohydrates when training volume intensity is there. That's what's going to help you. And number 5 relates to number 4. Triathletes or endurance athletes historically generally don't eat enough based on their training volume. So I think if you get certainly eating enough right within training, it can help you with the eating around that training. So it's working out and understanding how much protein you need, how much fat you need, and how much carbohydrates you need in order to keep that energy balance equation right. And then I think last one is not having a race day plan. And I think this sort of feeds into everything. Points 1 to point 5 is that if you're not practicing all of this in training, then you're pretty much separating out the race from your daily habits. What you should be really thinking about doing is whatever you're practicing in training is ultimately going to be your race day plan. And that's where if you do that and then you use something like the race day app, it can easily plan out what you're going to do on race day and not result in any sort of decision paralysis. Does anyone have any questions on that at this point in time? We can obviously go over any of this right at the end as well. Okay, so why athletes should not fear carbohydrates. I think 3 really important points here is that carbs are going to be the fuel for higher intensity effort. So anytime you're over 65% of your VO2 max or at around 75% of your heart rate max, the predominant substrate or fuel choice of your body is going to be carbohydrates. That's really important. So if you want to go fast, or if you're trying to go fast, carbohydrates are going to be your best friend. The limit, number 2, is the limits of high carb intake is being redefined. Okay. Previously, probably 5-10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, there were limits of around 60 grams an hour. More recently, they were starting to get numbers of 90 grams an hour where you're using multiple transportable carbs. So that, i.e. glucose and fructose. What we're now seeing is there are limits up to 120 to around 140 grams an hour being consumed and oxidized. So we see rates of around 2.4 to 2.45 grams of carbohydrates per minute being utilized by the muscle. And that's extremely high amounts. And I'm not saying that every athlete needs 140 grams of carbohydrates. What I'm saying is if you practice it and you're training with sufficient intensity and producing enough power, then those upper limits of 120, 140 grams of carbohydrates per hour are possible and will certainly make a difference to your race performance and certainly to your training performance. And that really comes down to point 3. High carb intake tolerance is trainable. You will have heard terms like training the gut or gut training. This is all related to habitual carbohydrate intake, so eating carbohydrates on a daily basis. That doesn't mean eating necessarily ultra-processed or processed carbohydrates relentlessly. It's just increasing your daily carbohydrate intake in line with what your training is. And then during those specific training sessions when carbohydrates should be consumed and practiced, then you're really pushing the amounts or grams per hour into yourself to practice what you can consume from a palatability standpoint. So can you consume liquid carbohydrates? Are you better off with gels? Are you better off with blocks? Can you tolerate a mixture of all of those? And based on the science, a mixture of all of them is still going to be suffice for you and provide the same benefits. It really comes down to what your individual preferences are. So if we get into the carb fueling process, and again, this is a very general outline, but it's something at least to start a lot of you off on and get you thinking about how you can fuel your process, certainly training your gut, practice during training and training your gut. So what a lot of people don't do is actually practice having a gel before a swim session. So what I would recommend is somewhere, you could probably bring it down to 10 to 20 minutes before the start of a swim session, have a gel, see how you react in that session. You certainly don't want to be having that gel sort of 30, 45 minutes before that swim session, or certainly before the start of a swim for a race. The reason of this is because of what we call rebound hypoglycemia, which doesn't always happen to athletes, but it can cause a sudden drop in blood sugars and cause the feelings of faintness and low energy. So what you're doing here, and you don't need to do this part a lot, but certainly if you are going to have a gel, 10 to 20 minutes before the swim in a race, at least practice it a couple of times in training before a swim training session to make sure you can swim very well with a gel on board. Now, when it comes to the bike, generally recommended, again, depending on your tolerance, men generally will be able to tolerate a lot more carbohydrates per hour in terms of grams per hour than women. Although saying that, I've worked with many age group and professional female athletes that can consume well and truly up around 120 to 140 grams an hour. Sarah Piampiano is one example. When she won Brazil Ironman, she was consuming around 115 grams per hour on the bike and just under 100 grams per hour on the run. And she ran a 256 off the bike. So it is possible, and she weighed 118 pounds. Holly Lawrence is another athlete, more recent athlete, but her consumption on the bike is just under 120 grams an hour. And on the run, she will easily consume between 70 and 90 grams per hour for a 70.3 distance. So it's not hard and fast rules for male, female, but certainly as a starting point, I would be suggesting that women probably space out their carbohydrate intake as practice just to build up that tolerance. And then certainly the way you should be looking about this and practicing in training is thinking about your brick sessions. So how do you feel when you consume large amounts of carbohydrates on the bike, and how does that impact the run? Ideally, thinking about it, the bike is setting you up for a really good run. If you're coming off the bike feeling tired, that your legs are gone, the run is not going to feel very good. If you've taken in large amounts of exogenous or consumed carbohydrates in any of those forms, and those forms sit well in the gut, and you feel good getting off the bike, that run is going to be a much better run. Generally speaking, I would recommend using gels on the run in the race, and these again should be practiced in training. Again, for men, you might be taking on slightly more. So if you're aiming for that somewhere between 60 and 90 grams per hour, again, we're talking long course racing here, 70.3 or Ironman, then you would be doing that. For women, again, you might be looking more at the 50 to 60 grams an hour, and that might equate to somewhere between 20 and 30-minute feeds. It does depend on the length of the race, and it does depend on how fast you're going and what your total carbohydrate capacity is. Okay, so I think, as I said before, like, I think there's really important that as a triathlete, and I get it, look, not everyone's professional, not everyone's aiming to be the top age group age grouper either. Some people are just aiming to get through, and I think that's absolutely fine as well. I think what you're still trying to do is establish, what do you need to have the most enjoyable race possible. It may not be about winning, but it may just be about finishing with a smile on your face. Okay, so back to the baselines, know your loss. Okay, what are you losing in terms of sweat rate, in terms of fluid loss? Do you know what your sodium loss is? Now, these are two separate tests. Okay, your sweat rate is going to be assessed by weighing yourself before and after individual sessions. Your sodium loss, or your sodium sweat rate loss, is going to be done via a machine. So a company like Precision Hydration would set you up. You would have to look on their website. They're a very good company. We know them well. Andy Blow and his team are fantastic. It sits on your arm. It is site specific. They don't equate it to whole body sodium loss, but at least it will give you an indication of what your sodium loss will be. And that's a one-off test. You only have to do that really once in your life. Your sodium loss is not really going to change depending on diet and that. It will bump slightly if you suddenly take in, 10 grams of sodium a day, but that's not really going to happen in real life. So you get that done, you then match that up with your sweat rate, and you can start to build out a hydration plan. Know your intake. Obviously, if you're consuming more fluids than you're losing, you run the risk of things like hyponatremia. Hyponatremia is effectively drowning yourself in fluid and can kill you. So it's much more dangerous to take in more fluid than it is to lose fluid. No one's ever died of dehydration. Same with intake, okay, with carbohydrates. You've got to know your intake. A lot of athletes will come to me at the start and go, yeah, I take on heaps of carbs. You then do a carbohydrate capacity test where they're recording or documenting how many carbohydrates they're consuming in an hour. And you break that then down to how many grams per hour are they consuming. And lo and behold, they're only consuming 30 grams an hour. So often just documenting what you're actually consuming and working out your grams per hour is a really useful exercise. You've got to practice this in different environments. There's no good doing all your sessions on a trainer with a beautiful fan on you and it's 50 Fahrenheit, and then you're going to go race in Texas and it's 110. Okay, you've got to use specific training to what you're trying to adapt to. So that's the SAID principle, specific adaptation for implied demand. Wherever you're trying to do, or whatever you're trying to do, make it specific to that, and you're going to have a much better outcome. Same for knowing your intensity. There's no point doing all your training at Z1, Z2, and not eating any carbohydrates and eating a heap of fat, and then going out into a race and thinking that you're going to be able to push zone 3, zone 4, and never have consumed a carbohydrate in training. So that's really important as well. Okay, so this then looks at the sweat rate testing. So this is a screenshot from Fuelin, our company. So this gives an indication of sort of guardrails. Okay, so regardless of whatever you've been told about your sweat rate, if this is saying the average sweat rate is 1.1 liter per hour, the peak sweat rate is 1.2. The average fluid intake for this individual is 0.5 liters per hour. Now, as a general rule, you should be taking in around 60 to 70% of whatever your average sweat rate is. Okay, so in this case, around 60% of 1.1 liters is probably around 0.6 to 0.7 liters per hour. So this person's probably not far off, but as you can see in the bottom cell of the screenshot, that this person based on their average fluid intake and their average sweat rate loss, they're actually losing around just under 2% of their body weight. Now, that is acceptable, but if that was on the bike and you'd already lost 2%, knowing that sweat rates are going to be higher on the run, you're probably going to end up quite dehydrated by the end of that if you don't increase your fluid intake. So sometimes getting your fluid balance a little bit better on the bike can again set you up on the run. And again, for all this sweat rate testing, again, we make it very easy within the Fuelin app, but you certainly want to be thinking about what temperature you're doing the testing in, how long the sessions are. I probably wouldn't do any sweat rate testing on sessions lasting less than 60 minutes, but you certainly should be doing it on the bike, on the run, and doing brick-specific sweat rate testing, assessing your fluid loss, assessing your fluid intake, looking at then calculating what your percentage of body weight lost is. It is important to document as well things like, did you get GI complaints? Did you get upper GI complaints, i.e. burping, belching, vomiting? Or did you get lower GI complaints such as cramping, again, nausea, diarrhea, or flatulence? Those things are obviously very important to see how you're going. And then the last point around sodium would be milligrams per hour versus milligrams per liter. If you are taking in a consistent amount of sodium per hour, okay, you're saying I need to take in 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour, but your fluid intake is actually only 500 mils per hour, you're actually taking in double the amount of sodium. You're actually taking in the equivalent of 2,000 milligrams per hour, 2,000 milligrams per liter, because your fluid intake is very low. So it is something to consider when you are combining sodium with carbohydrates or with your fluids, to just know that the amount of sodium is going to be relative to the amount of fluid that you're taking in. And then the very last point is be your own scientist. So doing a one-off sweat test is not going to help you that much, okay? You need multiple data points in order to determine what your actual specific requirements are. It's no different from doing a bike session. You wouldn't do one hour bike session and go, beauty, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to go out and smash a race. You're doing lots and lots of bike sessions, lots of run sessions, lots of swim sessions, and that's what creates consistency. And then carb capacity testing, same thing. It's all about logging results, repetition, and then doing it across a variety of sessions. So again, these are screenshots from the Fuelin app. You would say that you consume carbs. You can quickly pick all the products that you're doing. It will auto-calculate the amount of carbohydrates in it, and then it will spit out, in this case, this athlete consumed 73 grams per hour on a bike that lasted 1.7 hours, which was in warm temperature. And they consumed 2 packets of Cliff Blocks, or sorry, 1 packet of Cliff Blocks with 3 blocks in each, 2 endurance tap and 1 picky bar. On the far right, that gives an indication of sort of what the average intake of grams per hour, what the total amount of carbohydrates per hour is in terms of the peak intake, and then it breaks it down into solids versus fluids. For athletes who struggle with GI complaints, generally speaking, it's often good to remove highly concentrated carbohydrate products from what you're consuming and then move to things like gels and blocks, and then maybe reintroduce smaller amounts of carbohydrate fluid to top up. Often that will help athletes with GI complaints, and then you can gradually build in higher amounts of carbohydrate consumed. Women will tend to suffer from GI complaints more than men. This is just probably physiological differences between men and women. I haven't taken a breath. Does anyone want to ask any questions at this point in time? I know there's a lot of information that I'm dumping on you, and maybe you're taking notes. If you want to add just some questions into the chat group, feel free to do that as well, because that can sometimes help just at the end when we cover over some things. I'll just have a drink. So this is
Scott.
Yeah.
Scott, I'm going to speak for everybody. This is effing great and really, really appreciated. I'm blown away. Really, really happy for you doing all this. And I'll be quiet and let the other guys ask questions.
No, that's cool. Thanks. Thanks, Bill. So this is pre-session fueling. And again, look, this is a very rough guideline. I'm not saying this is specific to everyone, but at least it gives you an indication of things that you do. Okay. So working from top to bottom, let's say 60 minutes or less for sessions. Look, for any intensity, you could go into that session fasted, or you can have something as simple as like a piece of toast. Okay. I know there's a lot of conjecture about fasted training at the moment. For a session lasting 60 minutes, as long as you consume food after that session or potentially something during it, there's not going to be any problems. You're not going to drop dead. Okay. You're not going to cause massive amount of hormonal issues, especially if you eat something afterwards. Okay. So I'm just going to say that. I'm sure I'll get questions about that, but we can just agree on that. For anywhere between 60 minutes and 150 minutes for both the bike and the run, Z1, Z2, it would make sense to consume something with around 30 grams of carbs in it. That could be something like, some eggs. It could be something as simple as a piece of toast. Okay. One piece of wheat toast is going to have around 23, 24 grams of carbs. Put a teaspoon of honey or a tablespoon of honey, depending on how much extra you want to put in. That's going to top you up to between 30 and 40 grams. It does not have to be fancy for pre-session fueling. A banana before you jump on is going to give you around 26, 27 grams of carbs, depending on the size of banana. Great. Okay. You've got to remember as well that if you consume that 10 minutes before you jump on the bike, you're still effectively fasted because it's got to travel through your system. Okay. It's probably going to take somewhere between 30 and 60 minutes to actually transit through. So you're still probably in slightly a fasted state. The advantage of taking it 10 minutes before a session is that it actually helps you feel quite full, and it changes the way in which your brain perceives fullness in the stomach. And that's a form of gut training in itself. If you want the fuel to actually be in your system and be utilized during that session, then certainly consume that food around 60 minutes, anywhere from 60 to 2 or 3 hours beforehand. If you have a session that is a, Z3 to Z5 run, and it's somewhere between 60 minutes and 2 hours, certainly, look, you could double up, have 2 bits of toast with 2 tablespoons of honey or jam on it. Keep it simple, but make it very functional. If it's a 60-minute to sort of a 2.5 hour bike, Z3, Z5, certainly have some carbs before you get on there. Small amounts of protein, maybe 10 to 15 grams of protein. Again, maybe 10, 15 grams of fat, where it would give you a little bit of extra calories to allow you to get through that session. Now, this is pre-session fueling. I'm not talking about in-session fueling at this point in time. Now, certainly, you go over 2 hours for a run or over 2.5 hours for a bike, get the carbs into you beforehand. Honestly, you're not going to get fat from it. Your session's going to feel so much better. You're going to perform. You're going to do exactly what your coach says, and you're just going to come out of that session much better as well. Okay. So certainly consider eating, something like pancakes before, depending on how many you eat, 5 or 6, banana topped on, have some blueberries, have some strawberries. You can eat real food, have some toast with some jam. You could do that. Okay. And that's certainly going to get you set up on these basic rules to get through it.
Scott, one more question on that, please.
Yeah.
The difference between fueling for like a long zone 2 training run and a 70.3, would you lower the protein for a race
Beforehand?
or would you, lower the amount of protein you would eat for a pre-race meal?
So on race morning, no, I actually get all our athletes to consume about 40 or 50 grams of protein, because on race day, they're actually consuming it about 2 to 3 hours before the race. Right. So I think you want, my point is, like, your muscles are going to be working really hard. You want some amino acids floating through your body. I think you'd be crazy to skip protein in the morning.
And what kind of ratios, if I'm doing a 3 or 3.5 hour zone 2 training ride?
How old are you?
How much protein there?
How old are you?
Oh, I'm an old fart, 65.
Yeah, I'd be taking on 40. It's zone 2, so who cares? You're not going to vomit or anything like that. So you're getting the amino acids around your body. You're supporting yourself. I would have something like overnight oats is something I talk about with athletes a lot. So overnight protein oats. So for you, if it's 50 grams of let's say it's 60 grams of rolled oats. It's 1.5 scoops of whey protein isolate. If you eat whey protein isolate, that would give you around 40 grams of protein. Mix that with the milk of choice, whether it's dairy or whether it's a nut milk. Put some cacao nibs in there, some blueberries, some raspberries, some chopped up banana.
That's good. That's what I do.
Shake it in a mason jar the night before. You get up in the morning. If it's on a trainer, you can start eating it in the 20-minute warm up, or you can eat it before you get on there. That's how I'd be approaching it. That's how we approach it with all our athletes.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. So then if we get into in-session fueling and hydration, obviously, again, these are just a few of the products that we recommend. We're pretty product agnostic. What I mean by that is I don't push any particular products. I only push products that I believe work. So Endurance Tap, Precision Hydration, Morton, and Cliff Blocks, they're great products to use. Obviously, there's millions of other products out there. I'm not saying you can't use them. I'm just saying these products work, and they are used and chosen by professional athletes that I work with. And these are obviously gels and blocks. I'm not talking about the liquid. Liquid Precision works. Liquid Morton works. Tailwind does work, although I think it does cause more GI complaints than I've seen than the other products. SIS is a very good product as well. I think their beta fueled gels and blocks are very good. So I think you can use all sorts of products. Again, zone 1, zone 2, I'm not saying you just can use these products, but they are simple and they're easy, and you potentially could use picky bars in a 70.3 or an Ironman when you need extra calories. I wouldn't be suggesting using something like a nut butter pouch in an actual race, but for Z1, Z2, things like Justin's almond butter pouches, trail butter is very good. I've been using that recently. I quite like it. Whole macadamia nuts are very good. Trail mix. You can use sandwiches if you want for zone 1, Z2. Bananas if you really want to carry one on a bike, although I wouldn't recommend it because it's mushy. I know there's the argument for like real food versus, processed foods. My argument is this: if you're going to race and you're going to eat real food in a race, good luck to you, but it's very difficult. If you're going to use products such as gels, blocks, and liquids, you need to practice them in training in the appropriate sessions. Okay. That's what I mean by that. And then post-session fueling, I think to someone like Bob, where he was asking, look, I think there is, again, a lot of confusion. I'm going to try and make this very simple. In terms of protein intake, look, my view on this is whether you're a young female, male, whether you're premenopausal, postmenopausal female, or you're an older male over 60 years of age, you want to be consuming probably somewhere at least 30 grams of protein, up to 40, and even beyond that. I think they're now showing with older athletes, okay, even consuming an amount of protein around 60 to 70 grams of protein in that feed could be beneficial for that older athlete. And that's a lot of that's done on males. It hasn't been done on females. What we do know, the research around postmenopausal women consuming an amount of protein up to 1.6 grams per kilo of body weight is not enough to support lean muscle mass gains. Okay. And a lot of that is done in gym, perimenopausal or postmenopausal women. But my point being is that that's a lower amount than what we would provide to an age-matched male. So why aren't we providing age-matched amounts of protein to postmenopausal women? So for a postmenopausal woman, I would be say, depending again on your weight, but somewhere between that 30 and potentially up to 50 grams of protein in a feed post-workout would certainly be recommended. And I would do the same for someone who's younger as well. So that's around protein. And protein is super important for you in terms of assisting recovery from bone perspective, from muscle perspective. And if you're talking about, things like amino acids and collagen synthesis, then yes, certainly it can play a role as well. If we're talking about carbohydrates, certainly it's going to depend on, are you in a phase of high performance or are you in a phase of body composition and trying to lose weight? I think you can split that down. Total carbohydrate intake is going to be dictated by your total energy needs. But again, look, if you did a really if you did a 2-hour session and you're in a performance state, you certainly want to be aiming for at least 50 grams of carbohydrates in that meal. You could probably push out that amount of carbohydrates based on duration if you are in a body comp, but certainly don't avoid carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are going to help you replenish from bone mineral markers. So really important for female athletes out there, but consuming carbohydrates post-training, whether it's resistance training or endurance training, is going to have a positive effect on bone mineral markers. Okay. So if you're in keto or if you're in low carbohydrate diets and you're doing a lot of exercise and avoiding carbohydrates, you are probably negatively impacting your bones. And I cannot stress that enough, that avoiding carbohydrates post-training could be negative on your bone health. So please don't avoid it. Even if you consume around 30 grams of carbs, it is probably in the acute phase and certainly over a chronic duration going to have a positive impact. But certainly if you've done moderate amount of sessions and you've got follow-up sessions, somewhere between that 50 and 100 grams of carbs post-session, and then in line with the rest of your day is going to be very important. So this would be an example of something that, like, this is taken from an athlete's program. So you can see up the top, they're getting prescribed 150 grams of protein, 85 grams of fat, 480 grams of carbs, with a total of 3,285 calories in a day. Now, this is only out of session fueling. It does not take into account the amount of calories consumed in session as well. We purposely do that because psychologically, I think it helps athletes actually go, you know what? I'm getting told to consume a lot of fuel in my session. If that's what he's telling me to do, and I don't have to worry about what I'm eating around that because that's also taken into account, then it helps with adherence to actually high carb fueling in the sessions that require it. That's the way that we do it. And I think it works very well. And speaking to a number of professional and also very good age group athletes, it's been a game changer for them because they're now no longer calorie counting for in-session fueling and just focusing on what they're doing outside of that. So in this case, on the left, you can see that there's a green snack before a very high intensity ride. So they're consuming around that 100 grams of carbohydrates. So you can see on the right-hand side, Bob, what we see there is this person had exactly what I discussed: overnight oats with fruit salad, a couple of boiled eggs and 2 white toast. Okay, that would have been consumed probably an hour to an hour and a half before the session. They then go into the session. So on the left-hand view is the condensed view. You open it up and you can see here, it should say Z. Oh yeah, so it's a Z2 session with Z3. They've been given a target of 90 to 120 grams of carbs per hour, which is around 360 to 480 calories, with plus or minus 10 grams of fat, which could be consumed via a bar. And then we're breaking it down into what does that actually look like. It's either 3 blocks or 1 gel every 15 to 20 minutes, plus or minus 1 bar every 60 minutes. They're given, in this case, just a very general rule for hydration, because at this point, they haven't logged enough sweat tests to know what their specific sweat rate is. After that session, you can see that there's a green breakfast. What that means is they're being told to eat, again, around 100 grams of carbs. They've then got a yellow snack. So before doing their strength sessions, they're then consuming again a snack, doing their strength session. And then after that, they've got a green lunch. So it's all they're seeing is these colors and knowing, okay, green is higher amounts of carbs, yellow is a moderate amount. If there was a red in there, they would be seeing red and they'd be doing that. So it's structuring it so that they understand what they're doing. So this is another example. Again, you can see that there's a number of different colors on the far left hand. This is actually taken from my plan. So I'm eating quite a lot and training a lot at the moment. If I then break it out, it shows me exactly what I'm doing. By tapping on the snack cell, I can then bring up an option such as white toast with almond butter jelly with the exact macros, and that would be tracked against what I'm giving. And then same thing, if I tapped on lunch, it can provide a few different options that I could plan ahead and have. So I think the key takeaways for me is that high carb fueling is essential for triathletes. I don't think anyone who actually understands the science of high performance and high performance nutrition can argue that carbohydrates are going to be the macronutrient of choice in order to make you go fast. I get it. You can do a triathlon. You can do an Ironman on high fat. Good luck to you. You are not going to be at podium, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but even those people who do train with keto and low carb, certainly during races, will be consuming higher amounts of carbohydrates. High carbohydrates equals high performance. If you want to listen to someone maybe that is slightly higher profile at this point in time, Olaf Boo, who works with the Norwegian hype train, i.e. Christian Blumenfeld and Gustav Eden, then he will talk a lot about fueling for the work required, okay? High carbohydrate fueling, lots of calories in order to do it. Eating versus drinking your carbs, it's really preference of the athlete and tolerance. So the way in which we utilize or oxidize those carbohydrates has actually been shown to be very similar, whether you're eating, drinking, or combining them. That's important. Blocks, gels, liquids. Bars is a different scenario. So if you do get a lot of GI complaints and you're consuming a lot of bars and liquids, I would probably look at what you're consuming. And your gut is trainable, okay? You can improve your ability to take on lots of carbohydrates and do better. It's just a case of practicing it. Very similar to practicing your swim, bike, run. You do a lot of it, you get better. And then your daily nutrition, i.e. your pre, your intra, and your post-training, focus on what you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to actually do the session really well? In that case, make sure you're eating before, during, and afterwards. If obviously you're trying to do things at lower intensity, the amount of carbohydrates and the amount of calories may not be as high, but certainly consider using them. The term that we like to use, and it's not a term that I coined, it was taken from a very famous research paper by James Morton and his team at John Moore Liverpool University, but it's fuel for the work required, okay? Fuel for the work required. If you remember that, what am I trying to achieve? What is the purpose of the session? Therefore, what am I going to eat in order to achieve that? Then it's a very good start. And just plan ahead, okay? Be purposeful with what you're trying to achieve with that. So effectively, how the Fuelin system works is obviously you would download the app. You actually have to go to our website and sign up. I should probably put that in there, but you sync your training plan. So it's what we term training-based nutrition. So the first caveat to this is if you don't have a training plan that is either housed in Training Peaks Today's Plan or Final Surge, then we can't help you, okay? But what I would say to a lot of athletes is doing my first 70.3, I don't understand how an athlete does an Ironman or a 70.3 or any triathlon if they don't have a training program. I get it that budget can be a constraint, but there are lots of options out there, okay? Companies like 80/20 do off-the-shelf plans for about $30 for about 6 to 12 weeks, okay? We sync directly with those 80/20 plans. They're good. Teams, Lauren Valley from Valiant Endurance is an amazing coach, and she can help you. Matt Dixon from Purple Patch Fitness, they have a program called Squatty. Again, they're all potential budget constraints that I think can help many different people in different ways. I think all you've got to look at is how much did you spend on your bike, your wetsuit, and your shoes, and then apply like, hey, if I don't get my nutrition and training right, all the equipment's a waste of time and probably a waste of my money. And you end up selling that anyway, secondhand, and losing a lot. So that would be my only thing I would say is, look, a coach provides structured training. Fuelin provides structured nutrition. The two of them combined, it really does help you and it does empower you. When you've got Fuelin, you do all this measuring and tracking. And again, it is simple to follow. It's just traffic light systems. You work out how the system works for you. And I think probably the cool thing that we do, and I'm really glad that Bill let me have the opportunity to talk with this, but we do these types of talks every week. So we do 45 minutes to 60 minutes of education. You can go onto our YouTube channel. We do post a lot of the videos there, so you can see sort of what we do. They are fairly long format and they're fairly in depth, but if you're on a trainer for an hour or so, you can certainly watch YouTube and go through it. We did just release a program which is called Pilot, and on the annual program, it's $29 a month. So as I said, it syncs directly with Training Peaks Today's Plan and Final Surge. It's, as I said, some of the world's best triathletes are using this program, and certainly a lot of great age groupers and a lot of age groupers who are just actually getting involved in the sport. And so, my big belief is that we can deliver world-class nutrition to any triathlete that is willing to actually have a go at it. Okay. I will stop sharing and we can go through some questions. So look, I know there was a lot of information there. So yeah, just let's go through Matt's question. Matt D, is he still on here? Matt D? Maybe not. He left, did he? Okay. So Matt's question was, what's your average intake of sodium per hour? Would you typically be targeting 1 liter per hour? This is for a 165-pound guy who is a moderate sweater. Okay. So average sweat amounts, it's very hard to give you a figure on that because it doesn't necessarily exist. The range is quite wide. So I would suggest starting off with an average intake of somewhere between probably 300 and 600 milligrams per liter. Okay, so it's per liter as opposed to per hour. In terms of your sweat rate, again, that's what I talked about there, is that you want to determine what your sweat rate is. So something simple, go and do an hour's run or an hour bike. Maybe don't consume any fluids during it, and then just work out your body weight loss. Weigh yourself before and after, naked or in a pair of swimmers, a pair of boxer shorts or something like that, whatever you want to wear, and then work out the percentage of body weight loss. And then you can quickly equate what is the fluid amount that you lost per hour. And then you can start to build on that. Again, fluid intake should be based around 60 to 70% of that fluid loss. And that would be a good point. So if you're losing, let's say you lost 1 kilo in 1 hour, your fluid intake rate should therefore be somewhere between 600 and 700 mils per hour. If you start with somewhere between 300 and 600 milligrams of sodium per liter, and you're not cramping, you feel great, that's probably somewhere around the right amount of sodium. Obviously, depending on your cramping and things like that, that could be dictated by your conditioning of your muscle, your hydration status, your sodium intake, and then your carbohydrate intake. So they're probably the big parts around cramping. Cramping is not fully understood, so take it from there. His other question was also on race morning. I've heard that you should take a gel right before because there's a double spike in insulin from both. So I don't think Matt was on the call before, but yeah, take a gel roughly somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes before the race, and that should avoid that rebound hypoglycemia. So that's the questions that I've got there at the moment. Does anyone have any other questions? Dawn or Dave or Bob?
Scott, yes, I do have one.
Yeah.
If I do get an insulin spike and a sugar crash, how long does it take to recover from that? And what is the best way to do that? For example, if my swim start got delayed and I just took 100 grams.
And you what?
Let's say I took a gel right before a swim start, and the swim start got delayed, and I do get a sugar crash. What, the insulin spike and the sugar crash, how long does it take to recover from that? And can you recover from that? And what's the best way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not going to kick in for somewhere another, 20, 30 minutes. You could just have another gel on the line and you'll probably be okay. Obviously, if you get elevation in blood sugars and you squirt out a heap of insulin and that drops suddenly your blood sugars, it's a natural response. Some people just respond worse than others. Jump around a little bit, force a little bit of release of glucose from the liver or fructose from the liver. That will get you moving, keep the blood flowing. If you have another gel on you, you could pop that, drink some fluid that might be present. You should be fine. in terms of, improving rapid loss of, hypoglycemia or anything like that, consuming a sugary containing beverage or gel will certainly help you very quickly.
I appreciate that. Your body language says it's no big deal.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about it too much. Just do some push-ups or something like that. Do some squats,
All right, thanks.
push-ups, keep warm, and you'll be fine.
Thanks.
Dave or Dawn or Rob, did you have any questions? You're on mute, by the way, if you are asking. Okay. Bill, did you have any questions? I know we didn't really talk about race day, but do you want to add anything about like race day app? Because I think it's a really great adjunct to, what we do. As I say, we don't necessarily provide race day plans. Our view is an athlete is practicing their race day nutrition and hydration all the way through training. I think what your app does, and you can explain it better, is that it then allows them to really formalize maybe what they've practiced in training along the way and then build those products into it. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that our apps were compatible. Boy, after watching this, and I had some other people comment on it, they are just really, really like twins, twins of different mothers. I'm looking forward to exploring this more with you in terms of how your nutrition, planning can feed into race day. And for the people who are on the line, race day helps you create a race plan for race day, using your pacing, nutrition, and the predicted weather. And Scott even brought up the effect of the weather on the various nutritional components. I'm in South Florida, but if I race in any other state, the weather's vastly different, and probably the same in Australia, in the north versus the south. Anyhow, if you guys are interested, my app is on the iOS store and the Android store. Today it's free. It won't be free for long, but check it out. I had a question, and I think it's in the chat. Do you have any opinion on the use of glucose monitors?
Yeah, I do. I think they're interesting. I think for the person who's maybe interested in how day-to-day nutrition impacts blood glucose levels and their response to sugars and things, it can be interesting. There is a delay in the recording and the provision of the data that they're providing. It's also not measuring blood glucose per se, it's measuring interstitial fluid, which is slightly different. So it is going to give some slightly different values from, say, what would happen with a venous draw versus a capillary pinprick. I think for effort and just being able to wear one and see what certain foods do on a daily basis, certainly interesting. Is it necessary for racing? I don't believe so, because end of the day, like, you're pushing in amounts of carbs based on the intensity that you're training. So whether you can see the number going up, is that really going to change anything? I don't think so. And, I think it might have been it was Gustav talking about on Rich Roll podcast. And he was like, he said exactly the same thing. He was like, yeah, it was really interesting. Like, I saw in the evening that my blood glucose was really dropping in the evening. So I just ate more in the evening. And that was his biggest takeaway. He didn't mention anything about racing, because I don't think you're very concerned about like what your blood glucose level is when you're racing. You're just consumed about getting total amounts of calories in per hour. So I think in that case, yeah, maybe interesting, maybe not. Depends on your level of interest in what things do. I mean, just remember as well that when you do eat something with carbohydrates that is of fairly high glycemic or moderate glycemic, it's normal to get a blood sugar spike. It's also normal for it to come back down. So, I think for athletes seeing that, it's good. I think what sometimes happens with these blood glucose monitors is that athletes get freaked out that they see a blood glucose spike. And then it creates this fear of carbohydrates, which I think is negative in that sense. So I think it can impair sometimes what athletes think about nutrition if they don't actually understand what the data is.
Thank you.
That's how I'd probably do it. Dawn, I know you're on mute and you can't get off mute. So sugar for carbs in races for postmenopausal women. Yeah. Look, I mean, again, it comes down to intensity. If you're working at an intensity, Dawn, of over 65% of your VO2 max or around 75% of your heart rate max, then whether you're postmenopausal or premenopausal, your body is trying to use the simplest form of energy, which is going to be carbohydrates at that point in time. So as long as your energy or your energy expenditure and your effort is matching that, then certainly taking on glucose and potentially some fructose to assist the total amount of grams per hour would be recommended to you. And it comes down to intensity, really. But certainly for racing, I'd imagine you're not out there just to have a dawdle. You're trying to go as fast as you can. So I would certainly be using carbohydrates. Does that help, Dawn? I know you can't speak, but if you can type, then at least. Thank you. Cool. Okay. So I hope that helps. You can reach out to me as well. So you can reach out to scott@fuelin.com if you've got any particular questions, but certainly have a look on the website. We've written a number of articles about strength and postmenopausal and nutrition for postmenopausal women as well. So it is something that comes up. We did a series of posts as well on Instagram with Feisty Media about menopause and how to help women. Cool. Okay. Well, look, we'll leave it there. And, hopefully this was beneficial for the people who joined. And then for those who watch it on replay, hopefully they get a bit out of it and we can progress for the second one. And hopefully the second one, we get a few more people turning up. But really enjoyable. And thanks, Bill, for having me on the call.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thanks, Bob, for your questions, and thanks, Dawn, as well. Great to meet you both, and good luck with your training.
Thank you, Scott. I'll be in touch. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. And Bill,
Yeah.
I will share this recording
Perfect.
with you. And we can, we can share it with the registered people, and then look, we can share it if we want, just on Pathetics group. And do that. There's no harm.
That'd be awesome.
So we can do that.
That'd be
I'll just open it up to you.
This was great, man. Wow. This is really, I expected a lot, and this is you exceeded the expectations. So certainly appreciate it.
Oh, that's cool. I think Lim's just coming on. She's just joining, so she might have got the time wrong.
The time's wrong, exactly.
Hi, Lim. You actually just missed the call. I don't know if you want to turn your microphone on. We're just finishing up.
Hey, I'm going to run. So thank you, Bill, for coordinating this as well. Thanks.
Yeah, Bob. Thanks, man.
Hi, Lim. You're on mute. Let's get on mute.
Well, I know you're tired.
Let's go. I got to jump off because I got another call now. Okay. But I'll share that stuff. And the things I didn't get from you would just be good. Some assets from you to do with race plan. I obviously didn't have any to put in, so
it's okay.
But next time, I think we just build on that. I can put in some screenshots of race day because I think that will help as well.
Oh, you know what I meant to do? I meant to ask these people to talk it up in the group again. Just to keep it organically active.
Yeah.
So
maybe just reach out to them, and I can reach out to them as well and just say, hey, who was there? Bob was there. I've got that list there.
Yeah.
Dawn.
I was surprised you had approximately 30 said they were coming. I don't know. That's not cool.
Look, it happens, man.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
And you do so you do this weekly for your own group?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. It's good. It makes me learn stuff as well. So it's cool.
Sure. I made so many notes. I filled up 2 notepads or 2 pages of notes. A lot of it for potential changes to race day and interactions between race day and Fuelin and whatnot. So maybe we could talk tomorrow or Friday, what next steps.